Welcome to Leading Beyond Limits, the podcast where we explore the extraordinary journeys and insights of remarkable leaders who have pushed the boundaries of what's possible. Your host, Angel Radcliffe, who is a digital transformation leader, author, speaker, and financial educator, will lead each episode and dive deep into the stories, strategies, and philosophies that have empowered these exceptional individuals to lead, inspire, and achieve beyond the ordinary. We're about to embark on a journey of discovery and inspiration, and together, we'll learn what it takes to lead beyond limits. So grab your cape, or at least your favorite coffee mug, because we're about to unravel the extraordinary tales of trailblazers who've turned impossible into I'm possible. Let's get started.
On today's show, we are speaking with Jeremy Doran on mastering effective communication. Jeremy's background has primarily been working with scientists and engineers and helping them speak to their non-technical audiences. We'll dive into some insights on communication that's for everyone, no matter what area you work in, across all industries, all roles. So join us as he will provide us with practical tips and techniques to enhance your communication skills and connect with diverse audiences. Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Thanks. I am really excited to be here.
I am excited to have you on and have you share all of this exciting information around communication for leaders. And I think in the realm of work that anyone does, communication is super important. It's key, especially when you are in a leadership role or wanting to progress to that role. So a super exciting topic. And before we get into all of the details that everyone wants to hear today, how about you share with us some information about yourself?
Sure. I went to school for both engineering and psychology, and I have ended up being in a lot of roles where there are engineers who have become managers. And lately, for the past 15 years or so, I have been doing leadership training. A lot of my clients have been engineers. Everyone struggles to go from being a great producer or a great engineer to being a manager and then eventually a great leader. It's a really difficult transition for just about everyone. It's a little more difficult for people in the STEM fields because the way they tend to communicate isn't the way most people like to be communicated with necessarily. And so in addition to the struggles that everyone has becoming a manager, they also need to adapt the way they communicate a little more than most people do.
That is very interesting. And I say that because I work in tech. And before I moved to technology, I worked in a non-technical role. And if you are non-technical and you're speaking to someone who's more technical on the STEM side, it's almost like a different world. So the vocabulary and even I don't want to generalize here, but I think that a lot of people that work on the technical side sometimes lack certain soft skills that we use day to day and some of those functional roles. And I think I know where you go.
What's funny is sometimes if I'm at a networking event and people ask me what I do for work, sometimes I'll say, I help engineers talk to humans. And no one doesn't get what I'm talking about. They always laugh, and they usually come back to me with a story. And my favorite story is someone was in marketing, and they said, oh, yeah, at my company, when someone needs to go and talk to the engineers, we draw straws to see who has to do it. So not all engineers are that way. It's a generalization for sure, but it's common enough that people really understand what I mean when I say helping engineers talk to humans.
I love that. I want to put that into the show notes. You need to get that put on a shirt and sell it. Honestly, I think people would definitely buy that. But I know you yourself, you had some communication challenges, and I know that helped to drive what you're doing. Can you just share with us some of the challenges that you faced in your career?
Absolutely. It really started when I was young. It felt to me like people just did not make sense. It felt like everybody had a code book of how to communicate with each other, and I just never got that book because people say things and everyone else understood what they meant, and I didn't necessarily. I think I maybe took it too literally. It forced me to really pay very close attention to the way people communicate when they say something, what they actually mean by it, really studying people's body language, and it got me to ask questions a lot more than most people do to make sure I understand. So that really, at a young age, started me on the journey of figuring out why I don't understand what people are actually saying. And what I find the more I dig into it is that everyone's got a lot of communication issues. We all have misunderstandings very often. I started out doing public speaking to engineers about communication, but it turns out realtors need just as much help because we all have a lot of assumptions that we make when we're communicating. Because things were so difficult for me, I make very few assumptions about communication, but most people make a lot. And what I try to do is help people understand the assumptions that they're making and why those assumptions are causing miscommunication.
Jeremy, I want you to tell us specifically. I know I mentioned just from my experience and some of the things that I've seen with technical people not having certain soft skills, but are there certain qualities that you can pull out from those people in those roles as engineers and scientists that you can say that maybe they've missed up the traditional career ladder? Or do you think it's something where it, this is probably another generalization, but I think that people who are more technical and into science and engineering, I think this is my personal opinion as well. I think their brain moves a bit faster. So they're processing things a bit faster. Is that something that you believe as well, or is it certain qualities that they were just missed in the traditional corporate laddering process?
It's interesting because people get promoted because they're really good at what they do. So if someone's a really good engineer, they get promoted into management, and then they're rarely taught how to actually manage. And one of the things that engineers and technical people in general, they are much more logical in the way that they think and the way they present ideas and the way they communicate. A lot of people are a lot more emotional. And if you say something that is just strictly the truth without considering how it's going to make someone feel, then it can be really misinterpreted, and vice versa. If someone's really worried about hurting my feelings and they couch something so much as a very logical person, I don't understand what they mean. I would rather just have them say, that shirt is ugly, than try to couch it in a way to make me guess what they're actually meaning. So on either end of the spectrum, it's difficult to communicate with the other type of person because you're either too direct and it can seem harsh, or you're not direct enough and it's just not clear.
It sounds like conversations I have with developers at work. But yeah, I'd like to go back to something you said. You said when engineers are promoted, they're not really given a training on how to manage. And I know it's not specifically like with scientists and engineers, it is across the board. And that is definitely something that has helped me be more passionate about leadership development because in the corporate world, people who are in these management roles, even senior management roles, I've seen people make it to the executive level and they've never led a team, or maybe they have, they don't know how to manage a
Mhm.
team, lead a team. And something that's really insane to me is how corporations will promote someone into a management role and they put you into this 1 day course of welcome to your first day as a manager and have you watch videos, but they're not giving you continuous training as far as what you need to do to work on communication between your team, how to make your team more efficient, how to pour into others and build other leaders on your team. So you're walking around, you're like, all right, I'm a manager, don't know what I'm doing. I know in my first management role, I had imposter syndrome. I had no idea what I was doing. So many people feel that way. So
Yeah.
I think it's just an issue across the board that companies have missed the mark on leadership development and promoting people and expecting you to just know just because you're good at your job.
So with engineers in particular, they tend to have spent about 5,000 hours just in college studying and going to class. And then by the time they get promoted, say 2 or 3 years in, they've had another 5,000 hours learning how to be really great engineers or great at whatever it is that they do. So they've got 10,000 hours of training to become excellent at a role. And then all of a sudden their role changes completely and they get, like you said, a 1 day refresher on what it means to be a manager.
Every single time I have this conversation, I'm like, it just really irks me. It really does. There's no development. So, Jeremy, I want you to focus on a specific instance in your career where communication played a critical role on maybe a project that you were involved in, or maybe it was something working with your team. Can you just share with us like one specific thing that you remember that really impacted your career trajectory?
When I was managing a team, there was someone on the team who came to me one day and I was really busy. And she started explaining, and she was very new to my team. So I was giving her a lot of slack. Even though I was so busy, listening to her story was making me twitch. I'm like, okay, just settle down and listen to what she has to say, and then we can work this out. She spent about 10 minutes explaining this situation. And then at the end, I asked her, okay, so what do you need? And she said, oh, nothing. I just wanted to let you know. And I internally wanted to explode. And instead, what I did was I walked away. And then later on that day, I let her know. I said, when I'm really busy, what I need from you is to tell me what you need or want. And then if I have questions, I will ask you for the details of why. But if you just start with all the details, you're going to lose me. And it's going to be very frustrating for both of us. So for her, I need to let her know that start with what you need and then fill in the details after. And I find that's very common with engineers. They like to tell the whole story of why a thing is before asking for what they need. And most managers just want to know what you need and then let them ask questions if they want to.
I like that, and I can relate again just because of the work that I do. But your situation there reminds me of a weekly call that we have with technical people and our non-technical people, and it ends up being a firestorm. It's such an uncomfortable call to be on because it's all this back and forth, and the new people are like, "What is going on?"
Yeah, you know
Because
what?
there's such a disconnect.
It frustrates me in meetings. If we have a meeting without an agenda, then I'll tend to just walk out because I feel like it's going to be a waste of my time. But what's really frustrating to me is if we're going through the agenda and we talk about some issue and then we all agree on the solution. Once we've all agreed, to me, that means it's time to move on to the next thing. But people will keep talking about it. I'm like, we all agree. Why do we need to keep talking about this? Let's move on because my time is valuable. But for them, they feel the need to talk about it and it's important to them. So it's a balance for me of how to make the meeting as efficient as possible and let them get what they need without taking too much time.
I agree. You should always have a meeting agenda that helps the communication process. And it's so beyond me how many people will set up a meeting. There's no details, there's no agenda. And you're like, why am I attending this call?
Yeah.
Or you get on the call and someone, as you said, keeps like pressing the issue and everyone's already agreed. And I feel like sometimes people just like to hear themselves talk. Another thing that's really funny is when you finally make it into a leadership role and you get to attend your first leadership meeting, it's not all like what everyone thinks it was like, oh, you're in here making all these great decisions. There's a lot of arguments, heated discussions, because everyone wants to be right.
Yep.
And Jeremy, I know your focus is specifically working with scientists and engineers, but of course, communication is it's across the board. So it impacts everyone no matter what role they play. And I want you to share with us some strategies that you found most effective for bridging the gap between technical and non-technical audiences.
Yeah, as you said, it's not just between technical and non-technical. Communication's the number one issue at every company. Every time there's a survey or every time there are exit interviews of why someone left a company, the issue is almost always communication. And I'm going to go back to not making assumptions and start thinking about the assumptions that you're making. It's especially important on emails. If you get an email, you are reading into the words their tone of voice. and you're imagining what the email means, but it may not mean what you think it means. When they wrote it, they had a tone of voice in their head. And when you read it, you have a tone of voice in your head. But those tones of voices may not match. I ask very often, whether it's email or in person, if I'm not 100% sure what a person meant and it triggers an emotion, it makes me mad or frustrated because I think they mean one thing, I will always stop and circle back and just double check. This is what I think that you meant by what you said. Is that accurate? And if it's not, they'll tell me. If it is, then we can go forward. But either way, not making an assumption about what someone means if you're not 100% sure, and just stop and ask.
I agree. You definitely have to stop and ask. And there's so many people that make an assumption. And I work with so many different people every day across global teams, and you'll see someone who just makes the assumption that something's automatically negative, and now you're walking around with a grudge towards someone on the team or maybe the client, and it's a huge misunderstanding. So I always say technology has super evolved, right? Gosh, it's so crazy how much technology has evolved since I was a kid, but now we have AI. And one of the things that I urge people to do when you're writing an email is putting your email into AI and having it read your tone, like the tone that you're sending the email, because so many people are tone deaf and don't understand how they're writing the email and how it will come off to another person. And you can always use AI to change your tone of voice so you can make it sound how you want it to sound. I know when I send certain emails, I'm trying to sound serious, a little witty. I'm always maybe cracking a joke here and there, even in my meetings. And so I'm like, let me just make sure my tone is not off on the emails. But that's a huge suggestion that I would make using some of the advanced technology tools that we have. And I think that can help clear up some of those misunderstandings, as well as just taking that first step and asking before assuming.
That is really interesting. I have not thought of that. I would sometimes ask another person to read an email and see how it sounded to them. But using AI is a great idea. Thank you for that one.
I love it. It's definitely impacting the way that we work. And there's some really cool tools in there. And even just making sure that your communication is inclusive. There's tools that can really read and tell you to change certain words so that you're not offending anyone. So I definitely urge you to check it out, or anyone listening to check it out. But a lot of the free tools are out there, Chat GPT and the co-pilots, and I think Google just renamed theirs Gemini, maybe. I don't know. It was Bard and now it's Gemini, but it's a lot of tools out there. So I'm excited to
That's,
see what it would look like this time next year.
I know, it's so fast.
So, Jeremy, back to communication for leaders. I know we focus a lot on some of the things that people need, or scientists and engineers need, when communicating with their non-technical audiences. A lot of what you do is speaking, you're hosting workshops. Can you give us some examples of the work that you're doing and those conversations that you're having with leaders?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to answer the question exactly the way you intended, but what I like to do when I do a keynote talk, it's 45 minutes to an hour. And what it really does is it's designed to open up your eyes to a particular issue, in this case, communication or whatever it is, and give you some action items, a couple of action items that you can take away from that short presentation. But the main point is to make you interested in further learning and further developing. And so after that, it is great to have either a workshop where you can really dig into one particular issue for 4 hours and really hone that. But what I most like to do are longer term trainings. So we do effective leadership development, and it's a 10-week course. So I'll meet with a group of people who are managers or leaders for about an hour and a half a week. And then they'll have lessons that they learn. They'll have a week to practice them and see how it goes. And they know they need to work on it because they're going to be seeing me the following week. Then we can check and see how it went and see if there need to be any tweaks, and then build on it with the next lesson. So they're getting spaced repetition, practice, feedback, and it's not a fire hose of a whole weekend of learning something. It is letting you incorporate it as you go and get better and better over the course of 8 to 15 weeks.
Oh, wow. So, do you really think that it takes a long time for someone just to change their way of thinking, speaking, or is it something easily you can pick up overnight?
There are certain techniques you can pick up overnight, but even those need practice. But one of the big things about becoming a manager is it's a whole change in your mindset. When you are using engineers for an example, the product that you make, say it is design drawing, is a thing that you spend a lot of time on and you take a lot of pride in. And that product gives you a lot of pride because you do it well. All of a sudden you become a manager and you don't have a product anymore. So what do you get your pride from? You get your pride from your team making great products. So for you, the team is now your product. And if the team does really well, that means you created a great product. And that mind shift is not an easy one to make, going from being proud of producing a product to being proud of your team producing great products.
Jeremy, I'd like to ask this question as well. I feel like this may go into some of the things that you're doing with other leaders, but have you found ways to craft messages that resonate with diverse audiences while still conveying that technical information? Or is it two completely different messages that would need to be sent out?
It's a blend usually. If you're in a room with very diverse people, then you need to do a little bit of both. There needs to be a hook right in the beginning to the what's in it for them. People want to know what's in it for them. If you can start with that, what's in it for them, or why is this interesting, then you can get people to pay attention to some of the details, because that builds on the initial thing that caught their attention. So if you do it that way and you make the hook pretty quick, then it's quick enough that it's not going to turn the really detailed people off. And it's interesting enough that it allows the people who don't necessarily normally care about details to be interested in listening to those, because it relates back to the interesting thing in the beginning.
That is very interesting. So much of what you're saying is resonating with me and the work that I do and the conversations I'm having on a daily basis. And so I'm over here grinning. We might need you to come speak to a lot of our people.
I'd love to.
But Jeremy, I know that we're having a really great conversation around communication and leadership and the technical side, non-technical side. But overall, what role does effective communication play in any leadership role?
The question to me feels so obvious. Communication is key in everything. Every personal relationship that you have, working with peers in a team, it's crucial. Being able to manage other people, communication, it's the way information is shared. And if there's miscommunication, then you're sharing bad information. And so to me, communication is the crux of all relationships, and business is filled with a lot of relationships.
Definitely. And I feel like I just had this conversation earlier this week. So I work in the consulting industry, and you have to be a great communicator because relationships are the key, the backbone of our business. And if you're not great at communicating and building those relationships, that's downhill for you.
Yep, makes
Definitely.
life.
I want you to think about the future. And I mentioned AI a little bit earlier, but just thinking about what's coming out, like technology wise, or even when you're specifically focused on communication, what do you see as the future of communication for people in the fields of like science and engineering?
So technology keeps changing and it keeps shortening communication. People used to always have face-to-face conversations, and then people would write letters, and letters were relatively long and full of information. And then email got even shorter than letters, and text and all the other very short communication feels so efficient, and it feels great because you can just do it really quickly and really short, but it makes it much easier to miscommunicate. When you are talking to a person live, You get to see their body language, you get to hear the tone of their voice, and when you are talking to someone on the phone, you lose the body language. You can at least still hear the voice and the tone and the pauses. With an email, none of that's there. And with a text, there's not even grammar. To me, the danger, the more that technology is used in communication, the less you're really understanding what the person means. And so technology, to me, it's great in a lot of instances, but I fear that people overuse it, and overusing it can cause communication problems.
That is a very interesting take. And I have never thought about it in that way. I think when we all look at the changes in technology, especially AI, we're looking at it like, oh my gosh, I can get so much work done faster and be more efficient and doing things better. And you might be onto something, losing the actual way of communication and actually true tones. And can you imagine if you're constantly communicating with someone via email, all their emails are generated by technology, and then you meet them in person, you're like, this is not the same person I've been communicating
Right.
with.
Yep. You're using a proxy.
I could definitely see that happening. I had not thought about that, but that is something to focus on. Jeremy, we've had a really great conversation, and I'm sad that the show has to end, but you've shared some amazing tips around communication for leaders.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I just want to ask you if you can share one piece of timeless advice in your journey or memorable lesson, something that you've learned that you'd like to share with our listeners that they can carry on with them in their own leadership journey.
It is one that everybody has heard before, but ask questions and then actually listen to the answers and make sure you understand the answer and not just pretend that you're listening so that you can talk again, but really stop and make sure you understand what the other person says before moving on. So ask questions and actually listen to them.
Thank you for tuning into another inspiring episode of Leading Beyond Limits. If you enjoyed today's conversation and want to hear more from our incredible guests, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback means the world to us. And if you have a remarkable leader in mind who you'd like to hear on our show, or any questions and comments, feel free to reach out to us. You can find our contact information in the show notes. Remember, leadership knows no bounds, and with the right insights and determination, you too can lead beyond limits. Until next time, keep reaching for the stars and leading with purpose.